Perfect, good. How are we all doing this evening? Hopefully we're doing all good. Let's just continue to mute everyone as they come in. That'd be lovely. Perfect. There's nothing against anyone here, only that we tend to forget sometimes that we're not on mute and therefore tend to disrupt or disturb things, even if it's by accident. Welcome to Belmont. Hope you are doing great, as well as we all can be doing. Look, they're piling in now. So we'll just give it another minute. We're live on Zoom and live on Facebook. And listen, thank God we're alive. That's a good start. So we'll just give it another minute or two. I hope you're all having a reasonably decent day and following the news with bated breath about all our Xmas, Christmas celebrations that we can have together with our families. It's very nice of the government. I suppose we didn't get Rosh Hashanah. Now we can have other festivals from other religions. Why not? So it's lovely to see all of you that I can see. I can't see that many of you because you can only get a few people up on the screen at any given time. But I really appreciate you joining, giving up some of your evening. But you're not really giving up anything because we're in for a real treat this evening. I think Svi is on. 1 second. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to find Svi and unmute him. Svi, I've asked you to unmute. There you are. Now I've got to find you. How are you doing?
Good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
There you go. Look at that. Shane upon him.
How are you? Nice new glasses you have, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you very much. My wife chose them. There is no surprise. Svi is joining us from Bet Shemesh, I think. Well, that's where you were last time we spoke. Are you still in Bet Shemesh?
I still am, yeah.
You look great, Svi. Wonderful to see you.
So do you.
A
few more grey hairs in the beard.
You know what? Lockdown.
Can't get yourself to the hair.
The barbers, you know, they're closed. I can't treat my beard. Yeah, no, we're all good. I'm learning all this like production, you know, all the technical sides. The last time we did this on StreamYard, we thought might be where we just produced it out to the world, but we thought might be nice to be able to interact with people. I'm going to just kick us off now, just saying hello to everyone. And of typical, my front door has just gone. Who is knocking? Who is here knocking on my door now? Hopefully, one of my daughters will be able to get the door. I'm gonna have to get up. They'll try again in a minute. Girls, welcome to Belmont. I did all that already. So it's wonderful to have you. First things first, just want to say a huge thank you to Doreen and Michael Swan, who have generously sponsored this evening in loving memory of their parents. And also, Michael has been a bit unwell, so we wish him a refuah shalema, hopefully for a speedy recovery. Svi is in no need of any kind of one second, girls, that's the door. Can someone get it? Svi is in no need of any kind of introduction from me. But anyway, Svi is the founding director, producer, lecturer, tour guides, historian, amazing person of JROOTS, which has been running programs, educational tours for all over the world for how many years now, Svi?
15.
15 years. Svi and I have done numerous, I think I last counted 7 or 8 trips to Poland together on heritage trips, but Svi goes all over the world. Our own community has done 1 trip. We unfortunately had to postpone the trip in May due to restrictions we had, but also Svi has done 2 programs with us over the previous lockdown. We did a tour of Hebron and a tour of Tzfat. And just as a sort of an introduction, that the format of this evening, Svi and I spent a long time trying to work out the best way of trying to produce these things and to present them to you. And we worked out that rather than the original plan, which was to kind of just put a camera on him live in the moment, it's dark. Thanks. I'm just in the middle of it. Thanks. It's dark in Israel and the Wi-Fi 4G. So we thought, send him up, go and do some proper video recordings, and then he's going to present them to us now. So I'm going to attempt to do all the technical, bring up the videos as and when, but I'm going to take a step back now and hand you over to the fabulous Svi Sberber. If you have a question, I've muted you all so you can't unmute yourself, everyone else. If you have a question, stick it in the chat and we'll read them out as and when we find them, or towards the end, or you can just hurl tomatoes at my screen and maybe I'll see you. But probably better to put it in the chat, and handing you straight over to the fabulous Svi Sberber.
Hi, thank you, Rabbi Levine. And nice to see everybody from Belmont and beyond, I can see, here on the Zoom evening. So first of all, I hope you get out of lockdown soon. You should see what post-lockdown is in Israel. It's fantastic. Okay, I just came back actually from the old city. It is quite happening, so it's very nice. I want to start off by saying this. We decided this evening to go to the Golan. And I know that many of you may have been to the Golan, but hopefully we're going to show you some new places within the Golan. And I'm sure that many people who are here on the Zoom, one of the things that they are chalishing to do is to come back to Israel. So we wanted to be able to give you that type of idea when you watch the videos here of the beauty of what's taking place. Maybe I'll start off by reading this. Yoram Talev, which is a very famous Israeli folk singer, he wrote a poem many years ago. And for me, it depicts so much of Israel itself. He says as follows: "This is the land, without words, 1,000 forms, 1,000 colors, rivers, roads, domes, and curves. You can see the division line, the horizon, the line of the light and the watershed, land up above, land without sky, the Jordan, the Yalkon, the valley, the plain, the crater, cutaway mountain, falling shadows, dry riverbeds, water sprinklers, growing fields, oh my homeland, bare rocky hill. This is the land, its beauty in itself, the play of shape and color, the abstract drawing, the abstract of nature, the music of the waterfalls, the ridge of the mountains, the ranges and the hills. This is the beauty of the land. Even if you traverse its length, its width, sometime in your life, with your youth movement, the army, your friends, your children, even if you crossed it with a map at your side, your hand on the steering wheel, it's only when you view it from the Golan Heights that you perceive how God sees the land." Now, it's a beautiful idea that he wrote, but you should be aware that if there's one place that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw the land of Israel, when Moses saw the land of Israel before he died, of course we don't know exactly where that was, but before he died, and there's no burial place has been left to us of Moshe. The one place he never saw was the Golan Heights. The one place that God didn't show him was the Golan. And that's because of what we're going to hear now in the introduction, which you're going to learn about what the original name of the Golan was and what it was used for.
Bear with me, I'm coming. I need to get all the technologies.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to Ramat Golan, where we're going to be visiting today. The Golan, which is behind me, of course separates us from the Galil, which is this way. Lebanon would be this way, and Syria will be further, where we will be seeing the border a little later on. Until 1946, the whole area that we're about to go into was once Syria. And before that was under French control. And even before that has a major history which is connected to the people of Israel. But the Israeli, if you want, the Jewish presence of this whole area will pretty much stop in the 6th, 7th century. And there'll be this whole time period of 1300 years, 1400 years, where we won't be here. Unfortunately, much of our settlements, much of our communities were destroyed here. Today, we're going to visit some of those places. We're going to go all the way back, and we're going to look at the modern history as well. Remember, the Golan gets its name because this area was the cities of refuge. There were 60 cities of refuge that are mentioned in the Torah. One of the most famous is a place called Bashan, which is the name of the Golan. Golan was one of those cities in Bashan as well, and that's how we derived the name that we have over here. Later on, the kings of Israel will fight here, even against King Aram of Damascus, all the way up to when Elisha will also prophesy that King Hoshea will be able to take over this area. The Hasmoneans will settle this place, but as we said again, until 1967, we wouldn't really be able to come back here. And we're going to start our story there. It's going to be a wonderful day that we're going to be together on the Golan. We're going to visit many sites.
Are you muted? I didn't do it. 1 second. Let me find you. Oh, this technology. Ask to unmute. No, I didn't mute you. You muted yourself.
Okay, well,
There
I can't unmute myself. All right, so we entered into the Golan from here. You're now, for those people who are familiar with the map of Israel, you're right at the very tip. We actually turned right from Kiryat Shmona, and we were heading to the Golan from the very, very northern tip. The only further part of the Golan, which is going to be further north than this, of course, is the places which today are still in lockdown in Israel. They are the 5 Druze villages of the Golan. The Golan itself today has round about 25,000 Jews living, if not to close to 30 today. And they have around about the same number of Druze that are living on the Golan. The most famous place, of course, is Majdal Shams, which sits at the base of the Helmon. All of that whole area has got a lot to do with where we're going now, because the Helmon, of course, is the place where it snows and you can ski in Israel. And it then continues into the Nachal, the riverbed, called the riverbed of Helmon. So we're now going to go to the Banyas. And even though there is a background noise that you're going to hear now the whole time, remember what month we're in. We're in December in Israel. Remember, the last rains we had in Israel, apart from the rains that we got last weekend, okay, pretty much. We got a lot of rain, thank God. We got the whole of November's rains in one day. But the last rains that we really had were in March. And look at the waterfall of the Banyas. I won't mute myself now.
Hi, we're here at the Banyas in Ramat Golan. We've come to describe what really took place here that brought Israel to come up here in 1967. Now, of course, there's the historical importance of what the Golan was. That was a major importance for Israel to be able to come back here, to the area that was known as Bashan, the area the Hasmoneans were in, the area that even from 1880, there was a group of people that came back here, bought up land in this area over here, and resettled this whole place. So all those things were important. But there was another major importance, and that is connected to something that we call from 1964 until 1967, the War on Water. Behind us, you can see the Banyas Falls, which are here. From 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great comes here, he realizes the importance of Banyas. We then have a later description in 200 BCE of a battle that takes place here in an area they don't call Banyas, but they call it Panyas. This also was used as a major division, a place where a border was set between the Muslims, which their capital was in Damascus, and if you want, the Roman Empire, the Jews that were in this area as well, later on. So it has a major importance to our history, the name Banyas. But why in 1967 did Israel have that impetus to come up here to be able to capture this area over here? 64, Israel realizes what Syria are trying to do. 35% of the water that you're now seeing running through here would have been much less, because the Syrians wanted to divert the water from coming from this place over here. They wanted to make sure that Israel, if you want, would be strangled, not having the waters that were running through Nachal Helmon that we have over here, not having the waters that were running through the Snare, running down to the Jordan into the Kinneret. Remember, come the 1950s, Israel had started building their national water carrier that would take the water from the Kinneret and from the riverbeds throughout the whole of Israel, allowing people to have water to drink, not so much all the other uses, because we could take other water for it. But the drinking water was coming from here. Come 64, the Syrians were having none of it. And they decided they were going to block 35%, as much as they possibly could. There were major skirmishes across the border. And if you want 1967, and the decision of Israel to come up to the Golan is twofold. Number one, it is to be able to secure those settlements that are in the Galilee, those places in the Galilee where they were being bombarded by the Syrians that we're going to deal with at our next spot. But also to be able to make sure that the water source will always be safe, and that the water that runs through the Banyas, continuing down to the Jordan into the Kinneret, they would all be plentiful, and that the Israeli people will have something to drink. Remember, you know, we say, and we started saying, Mashiv HaRuach Morid HaGashem. We say B'tein Tanu Mata Levachah, which in Israel we say earlier than the people who say it outside of Israel, to allow the pilgrims to get back from Sukkot, back to their homes in time, to be able to say those words of bringing the bracha of the Geshem, the blessing of the rain. We are not like other countries. Other countries have an abundance of rain, and thank God last year we had it, and you can see some of that still here. Even though we've had rain this year, but this is the rain that's still coming through from last year, from the snow that's melting from the Chalmon. But it says in the book of Deuteronomy, in Devarim, Eretz Yisrael lo ke'Eretz Yisrael. The land of Israel is not like the land of Egypt. The Egyptians have the Nile. We base everything on the bracha, on the blessing that God gives us of the rain. What a true blessing that we have when we see this. And we have to also understand the weight that was on the decision makers of the people of Israel in the 60s and 67. Never will the people of Israel be strangled. Never will they not have water to be able to drink. And if it means that we have to go to war in this region for water, we will. Many people believe the most important commodity in this region is oil. It is not so. The most important commodity in this region is without a doubt the water. Enjoy the beauty of Nachal Gamon and the Banyas. I know that many of you may think that you're looking at a riverbed that's from Italy or from Switzerland, but this is the Banyas. This is the riverbed, the Chalmon, that is going to run down all the way to the Kinneret, to the beauty of that Sea of Galilee that we have, which again, up until a certain time, fed 2/3 of Israel. Today, that's not the case with the aquifers that we have, and of course with us doing desalination, which we'll maybe talk about a little later on. Look at the beauty of this riverbed.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the view. Just one quick word, because I know that with the videos we have to get through the evening and not too much speaking from my perspective. But one quick thing, I once asked Avigdor Lieberman, who of course was the infrastructure minister in Israel, when I felt like he was normal. I'm not so sure he is so much today over the last few elections. But I asked him when he was infrastructure minister, I said, why is there no emergency on water? And his answer, I think, was very important. Number one is he was the infrastructure minister in Israel that didn't just look after the chair he was sitting in. Even though during his term, the desalination plant would not be finished, he started the work. Most people want to finish the work within their term, so they get the kavod, the honor, for completing a project. He was adamant that you had to desalinate as much water as possible. But number two is this. He said, what do you want from the people of Israel? They have an emergency with the Palestinians, an emergency with the Syrians, an emergency with the Hezbollah. Okay, you want to give them an emergency with water as well. Everyone's just going to leave. It's going to feel like there's emergency with everybody, with the Hamas, etc. He said, let's just, whatever we have to do with water, and we have to, God willing, we'll have enough. And as you saw at the present moment in the Banyas, Baruch Hashem, it's still flowing. I urge all of you in Israel get out and see it. Okay, it's very beautiful to go to. Okay, we should move on, I think.
You want me to play the next video?
Go for it, because I don't want to keep people too long. This is the top of the Banyas.
So behind us now is Kalat Nimrod that you can see on the hill over here. Kalat Nimrod, or Nimrod's fortress, is named after the biblical character of Nimrod. They say that possibly Nimrod had a fortress up here, another place that maybe you haven't visited when you came to the Golan Heights if you've been here. It happens to be today one of the largest Crusader castles that stood here. Again, protecting the road from Lebanon, from Tyre, that would go out to the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm sure that many of you have been to Akko. You might have seen the beautiful Crusader city of Akko, cutting across the Chula Valley to the Nimrod, making sure that all these areas over here, not only were they protected, but more so they were able to utilize these areas to be able to get taxation from people who were using the roads. You can hear in the background the water that's running. You never built a fortress where you didn't have water. And so whether you go to the places in the Galilee where you see the Crusader castles, or in the Golan over here, you'll know there'll be next to a lush waterfall, and the Banyas that runs and continues all the way underneath this area over here. The Nimrod castle will also be a place that Israel will have to capture when they come up here in 1967. Now when you look at the view that we can see of the Golan Heights beyond us, I want you to understand the difference, or the differentiation between me and the heights that you see. Remember, anyone that controls the heights controls everything that's below. They have a full view of everything that's going to take place. And now understand, from 1946, where Syria received its independence from the French, all the way up until 1967, this is the view they had. The view, not just of the Banyas, but of the continuation of the Galilee. Though we can't see it from where we are now, Kiryat Shmona is a stone's throw away from where we are. And the kibbutzim that sat over here, which we'll see in a second, unfortunately received its fair share of artillery, bullet fire, you name it, from the Syrians that sat here. We're going to now go to a place called Telfaka. So as we drive up to the Golan, you'll be able to notice danger mines everywhere on my left-hand side, which is heading towards the border. Not all the mines, unfortunately, around the Golan have been cleaned. Many of them were put in here by the Syrian soldiers between 1946 and 1967, and it's just too expensive to clean them, even though it has a cost of life. But they do their best to make sure the people and the cattle don't go anywhere near there. We're going to be crossing over now the riverbed of the Banyas, and we're going to be heading now to one of the first places that the Israelis had to capture in 1967, called Telfaka.
Okay, as we drive along now towards this story of Telfaka. Telfaka, of course, is now the first the second battle, I should say, of 1967. You're going to hear about it right now in the video which we're going to be talking about. I think that when we think about what we're about to learn now of 1967, the cost of life, we think about 67, we think of Jerusalem, we think of Sinai, okay, we think of Judea and Samaria, and then we think of the Golan. But the cost of life was immense for us to have to climb up the heights with the Syrians looking down at us and shooting at us. We paid a heavy price to be able to get to the Golan. We'll pay a heavier psychological price in 1973, but that will be further on, 6 years after 1967. But the cost of human life will be very high for us to be able to free the Golan, to bring it back to its historical independence, back to the Jewish people. Telfaka is also going to be connected to a story that many of you know very well, as I'm sure that you may have read the book, and you'll see this now in the video that we're about to show right now. So here's the story of Telfaka, and if you haven't been there, again, very close to the Banyas, beautiful day that you can have here. You should know the Golan. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rabbi Levi. Go ahead.
No, go for it. I won't play yet.
I was just going to say, you should know the Golan isn't just about this. Okay, this is a wine from the Golan. Okay, which I'm sure many of us have drunk some of that, but it is about all these beautiful sites and these historical sites which are very important. Okay, let's go.
We've come to the Syrian base of Telfaka to understand what these bases pretty much looked like that were scattered across the Golan before Israel came up here in 1967. The bunkers were huge, and I want you to bring you into one of them now so you can see the trenches and the bunkers, the fortifications that the Syrians themselves, if you want, had hunkered down ready for a long fight. Come inside. As we continue through the trenches over here, I know it's hard to see, but the fortifications are massive. The Syrians that were here, as we said, were ready for a fight. And they had a lot of information about Israel, but people didn't realize that Israel actually had a lot of information about the Syrians too. And that's down to the fact that we have a person who was photographed here. I want you to take a look now as if you are the gunner towards the Galilee, straight ahead of us. You can see the different kibbutzim of the Galilee spread out. You can see Kiryat Shmona in the distance over here. And imagine this was the view of a person, Syrian gunner, every single day from 1946 to 1967. For us to understand this a little bit better, we're going to go up top. Follow me out the trench. Coming out of the trench over here, past the trees that you're seeing now in the picture, which are eucalyptus trees. And we're standing again in the Golan. The difference between the Golan and the Galil is very much the stones that we're standing on now, these bazelet. And it's all part of the story as well. This is volcanic rock. The Golan actually was a volcano at one time, which erupted, and you're standing on the extinct volcanoes of the Golan. Connected to this story is a man that's connected to the rocks and the trees, because in the 1960s and 65 a man will be brought here. His name is Eli Cohen. Eli Cohen, of course, is probably the most famous Israeli spy. You may well have read the book Our Man in Damascus. You might have seen the HBO TV series that came out about him. He was brought to the jewel in the crown from the perspective of the Syrians, which is the Golan outposts. The outposts that were here facing towards the Galil. Look at it. Every person that's standing here can see everything that's below us and know that they had unbelievable information about things that were going on. If we were to continue south from where we are, we get to another base called Gadot. Gadot looked very much like this, but one of the things that we found in Gadot tells us how much information they had. In Gadot, they had a map of the kibbutz that sat below them, called Kibbutz Gadot. They had a map showing when people left for work, where the children's houses were, where the dining hall was, all the municipal buildings that were inside the kibbutz. Everything. They knew everything. People who were standing on the heights rule over the valley below. And that's another reason why Israel knew they had to come up here, to be able to help all the kibbutznikim down here and the different cities that were here from the constant fire of the Syrians from 1946 onwards. There was no discipline, if you want. From the point of view, are you allowed to shoot, not allowed to shoot? Here you go, here's a box of bullets, you can finish it by the end of the week. And they did that. Eli Cohen, who was in Syria at the time, because he's been sent there by the Mossad, very successful. So successful that when the head of the ruling power at the time, called the Ba'ath Party, dies, he is asked to take over leadership. He turns it down. But his friend at the time, a man called Hafez Assad, takes the leadership of the Ba'ath Party. We know Hafez Assad because he was the president of Syria, and his son Bashar is now the president of Syria. Eli Cohen was brought to these areas over here, whether Telfaka, where we're standing now, or another area further down called Tel Aziz, or one of the other outposts that were here, in order to get a view. And he took that view, and he, by the way, we have him photographed at one of these bases from Israeli cameras that were down there, who took a photo of him. The Israeli intelligence. But when we come to a base like this, we also remember a tale of Eli Cohen. Whether he came here and there were trees here before, or whether he told the Syrians to plant these eucalyptus trees that you saw, and then passing that information on to the Israelis, know that wherever there are eucalyptus trees, that's where there's a base of the Syrians, will help Israel 2 years later in the 67 war. Eli Cohen will be caught in 1965, hung in the main square of Damascus, and as you know, we have never received his body back. Now look at the view, and I want you to now understand what it meant for the Golani Brigade to have to come up here on the 9th of June 1967. I want to take us to a place now which remembers the Golani soldiers, for us to understand the story of what took place here. On the 8th of June 1967, we're already 5 days pretty much into the 6-day war. Jerusalem has been, thank God, recaptured. The Sinai has been taken. Okay, we've got areas of Judea and Samaria that are now sitting in Israeli hands. And they are told, the Golani Brigade, who have been waiting for their part in the war to start, which of course is to, if you want, free this area of the Golan and free the terrible terror that the citizens of the Galil have been living under for so many years, have been told on the 8th of November at night, we're not going to take the Golan. They start to pack up. They have showers because they haven't been able to do that because they've been on alert the whole time. They even light up their bonfires to cook things which they haven't done, so they didn't reveal where their posts were. And they go to sleep. On the 9th of June 1967, early in the morning, their mafakdim, their officers, come and wake them up, say, we're taking the Golan now. 6 hours before, they thought they were going home. But now they're ready to come up to the Golan. The first place that they're going to take is a place called Tel Azizah, which is further off, if you want, to my right-hand side. And then the brigade, the 12th Brigade and the 8th Brigade, come up to here, this area over here, to take Telfaka. They have not been trained in war before, and certainly not against, if you want, the lions of the Syrian army, who are ready to fight to the death to be able to hold on to their positions. They come up, they have a plan, but we do not know the reason why. But for some reason they change their plan and they head straight up towards the hill. Many of them are killed. In the battle that takes place in Telfaka, the first wave of officers and commanders are all going to be killed here. And over 30 soldiers are going to die here in that battle. As they head towards this place over here. 3.5 hours they're going to fight here. 3.5 hours you're going to see bravery, if you want, which is reminded every single time as a new Golani Brigade is sworn in today, of what their soldiers did in Telfaka. How they dived on top of barbed wire fences, people, volunteers, and the other soldiers ran over their backs to get to the next area where they would capture. All of these places were covered with Syrian soldiers and Syrian outposts, shooting constantly at them as they're coming up, and the Syrians are shooting down towards them. After 3.5 hours, with the people who had fought the original battles at the other sides of the Golan, all merging on Telfaka from the different areas, they finally managed to capture this place. Syrian soldiers were killed, 20 of them were taken, 30 Israeli soldiers were killed as well in the battle, and over 20 of them also got commendations for the top medals of the Israeli army at the time. You know, when you stand in places like this, and when we stand on the Golan today, and many of us have been to the Golan, and you've walked around, enjoyed the riverbeds, you've seen the beauty of the Golan. You've drunk the wine of the Golan that you can even pick up all over in different supermarkets even today. You have to remember its history. You have to remember the people who fought here. Who were they? 18 to 21-year-olds? who fought tooth and nail in order to be able to give peace to the Galilee, in order to be able to give this place back to the Jewish people, to their heritage, to understanding that we were once here. We had connections to this land, and we've come back to this place over here too. We have to remember, as it says on the wall over here, Yizkor, we remember them. We remember them for their bravery. We remember them for their Mesirut Nefesh, their self-sacrifice, to be able to bring the Golan back to the people of Israel.
1967 comes, and as we just heard, we managed to capture the area of the Golan. We actually do very well by where the lines are drawn as well, allowing Israel to sit on top of the heights on top of the Golan. The Golan, as you just heard, are made of volcanic hills everywhere. One of the places you're about to see now is just underneath the volcano. The volcanoes that sit around a place called Har Bental and Har Avital. Okay, Avi being the father, Bental being the son. One's taller than the other. And there's a whole line of extinct volcanoes in the Golan that Israel managed to hold on to, overlooking another place called Quneitra. During this time as well, there was a push to the government to allow people to settle in the Golan. The government refused because they didn't know what they were going to do with the Golan, whether they were going to offer it back to Syria, which they tried as well. Be aware that every piece of land that Israel managed to capture in 1967 was offered back to the various countries, whether it be Egypt, Jordan, or Syria. There was undercover conversations between leaders that took place. Just like, as I'm sure many of you who read the newspapers today understood, that Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Saudi Arabia, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, in an undisclosed flight to meet as well there, the king of, or the prince, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. There was a lot of undercover talks, but nobody wanted to recognize the fact that they had been beaten so badly in 1967. The first community that got to the Golan was a place of people that would be classed today as religious Zionists, a group who settled an area called Keshet, which today is known as Keshet Yonatan. And from there, you then have the floodgates that are opened for the kibbutzim and, of course, the city of Katsurin to be settled. 6 years afterwards, though, they're all going to be evacuated because 1973 comes along. Yom Kippur takes us by surprise, even though we really should have known about it. The next video, please.
Svi, I've had a question just quickly,
Sure.
just before you go on to 73. Going back to Eli Cohen, someone's asked, where in the Golan is, so obviously we know about the Syrians tried to make this complex for diverting water.
Yeah.
And the Israelis destroyed that. Where is that, and what's it called?
Where can you see that today?
Where is it?
So I mean, I can tell you, but it's going to be hard for people to understand. But if you're in a place, if you're in what's called a Summit Katzabia, which is the junction which is turning towards Aniyam and to the Golan, look towards the hills there. The hills, you will see there is a canal which is still there across the whole of the Golan, which they were building in order to divert all the water running down into the Kinneret. Okay, but
it's
still there. It's scarred in the landscape.
Does it have a name, the area, or it's just
no?
That's the, no.
No.
Thank you. Anyway, on back to 73.
Thank you for the question, though.
So 6 years after 1967, of course, which we captured the Golan in 67, which we spoke about in one of the other sites, you arrive to this place over here, which is known as Emek HaBacha. Emek HaBacha, which stretches out in front of us in 1973, will be the site of probably the most major battle of the war that will take place up here on the Golan. You know, you can't say that Israel didn't know that there was a possible imminent threat of an attack on us, because we were warned by various different sources. In fact, there were 11 times that Israel were warned. One of the sources that came out a few years ago, because of course all the files were locked up, was of a helicopter trip that a man took from Jordan to a Mossad safe house and met with a woman called Golda Meir. That man's name was King Hussein. King Hussein warned Israel possible threat of attack from Egypt and Syria. Israel, at the beginning of 1973, had helicoptered in beyond the Suez Canal into Egypt, had placed listening devices on the intelligence antennas of the Egyptians to be able to listen to what they could listen to as well. Here, if you want, all the messages that were going back via Israel and via Egypt and Syria and Jordan and other places. 2 weeks before the war, there was a discussion about an acquisition of the F-15s. Israel were not taken by the threat that possibly this whole area, which is now covered by Syrian MiGs, bought from the Russians, that they had superior air fire and air support, and that Israel had nothing to be able to match that. And on top of that, there was a man called Major Askarov, who had taken Dado, the Israeli chief of staff, and other members, if you want, of the heads of the Israeli army on a tour up here, showing them the threat of what it meant to try and hold on to this 40-mile border. There were no tanks here. There were not enough soldiers up here, and we were completely outnumbered. Because the 7th Brigade, who were training in the Sinai, and Moshe Dayan, who sort of had taken the threat not completely seriously, but was worried about it, he started moving those tanks up towards the Golan. And for 2 weeks from Rosh Hashanah, just before Rosh Hashanah, until Yom Kippur, we now had 177 tanks up here on the Golan. Beyond us, though, there were 900 facing us. We had 11 artillery batteries, as opposed to 457 that the Syrians had. We were completely outnumbered. Outnumbered in every way. Superior air fire, air support, superior artillery, the amount of tanks that were here. The Israelis, who had never fought at night, didn't have any night equipment in their tanks, whereas the Syrian tanks had night equipment and they could see at night. This was going to be a disaster. But then you have to remember there's something else. That desire and that will, especially with a man called Bengal, who was in charge of the 7th Brigade, family who came from the city of Lodz in Poland, a man who had lost everything in the Holocaust, was not going to give up easily. And they would fight tooth and nail here to hold on to this land. On Yom Kippur, the Syrians attacked with air fire, and then they started to move their tanks in. The Israeli army works on reserve duty. Up to 2 months before the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, Israel had called up the reserves. Here, the reserves weren't called up. And you need to understand that we talk about 80% of all people between 18 and 21 being killed in the first 2 days of a war. The only thing that will save Israel is its reserve battalions. It takes 72 hours to mobilize them. Everyone was at home because it was Yom Kippur. Lots of people had left the Golan, even the soldiers that were here, because it was Yom Kippur, and they were given the day off to be at home. They were left undermanned here, understaffed, without the right, proper crews here to face the Syrians. And it took us a while to get ourselves back in to understand what was happening. The 188th Brigade that was given, if you want, their task was to hold on to this border, were now in tatters. Even Askarov, who was from the 188th Brigade, who had showed Dado, the Chief of Staff, what was taking place, had been propelled from his tank from a Syrian missile. Avigdor Kahalani from the 7th Brigade was brought in here, to this particular region that we're in. And he came here to see 800 tanks in front of him. How was he going to stop them? He moves forward towards the line. And he tells his people, if we don't stop them, no one will. Acharai, after me. But he turns around to see his tank standing there. People terrified to go up to the line with 800 tanks in front of them. He then says to them, look how the Syrians are fighting. We are not cowards. Look how they're fighting. If we don't stop them, no one will. Between us and the Jordan River is 24 kilometers. And if they get there, they have a clear road to Tel Aviv. He went out and fought. And for 3 days, they fought non-stop. It was complete chaos everywhere. Even to the point that there were Syrian tanks within the Israeli lines, because they didn't understand where their people were, and also Israel hadn't noticed that the tanks had got into their lines. They would turn corners, they would see 3 to 5 Syrian tanks in front of them. Karlani describes this himself. Says he sees death in front of his eyes, but he manages to, thank God, shoot and destroy the 3 tanks. When Ben Gal, after the 3rd day of the war, turns to him and says, what's the story now? He says, we've managed to destroy 90 tanks, but we need help. We need the reserve duty to come back up here. The 73 war is still a war that Israel is getting over. After the euphoria of 67, we were all of a sudden brought down to earth by 1973. There is no such thing as kochi ba'otzem yadi, the power is in my hands. Remember, the fact that we're able to maintain the possibility to continue winning and being able to survive here in Israel is because of the fact that we have that Brit, that covenant with God. We were taught, if you want, on Yom Kippur, that most solemn day, a deep lesson. Golan is the UN. We're just actually passing its base now to the left, if you have a look out. Okay, that's the base, that's the actual border between Israel and Syria that you can see, the white buildings over there. As we said, the UN is not a peacekeeping force, it's a truce-keeping force between Israel and Syria, making sure that there should be no skirmishes here, that Israel and Syria keep to the requirements here of the amount of heavy military vehicles that you're allowed to have up on the Golan. You know, I once took a tour here in the Golan, and one of the people that I had was a commander of the UN. He happened to be Canadian. The Canadians were up here. We've had all different types of countries here: Polish, Canadians, Indians. Israel actually do like the Polish soldiers here. They've had a very good relationship with them. But the Canadian happened to be in charge here at the time. He came on the tour. I was up on a mountain over here called Har Ben Tal. I was talking about 1973, and I turned to him and I said to him, since 1973 there's been UN soldiers here. What has been, or what is, I would say, from your perspective, the most important decision that you make every single day as the head of the UN force that is up here on the Golan? And he said to me, it's what I do when I get up in the morning. So I said, what's the decision, the question that you ask yourself, or the decision you have to make in the morning? He says, it's what I'm going to eat for dinner that evening. And that tells you how quiet the border has been between Israel and Syria since 1973. Okay, that if the commander of the UN at the time is making the decision what he's going to eat for dinner, when he gets up in the morning, he has very little to do here, okay, during the day to make sure that peace is kept between Israel and Syria. As we said, thankfully it's been a very quiet border. The only problem has been ISIS and the civil war that's taken place in Syria. But between the Syrian army and the Israeli army, things have stayed quiet.
The last skirmish with Israel and Syria, I would say, face to face in Lebanon. You should know that, in 1982, in a club called Sultan Yaqub, which is a very famous battle that took place. You know, since I made the video, there was also a skirmish across the border, not between the Israelis and the Syrians, but the Israelis flew over Syria and bombed a few of their bases, which the Iranians held onto. But still, it's been a relatively quiet border. If you're in Israel now, you'll know that one of the biggest TV series in Israel now is called Shat Ne'ilah, okay, the hour of Ne'ilah of Yom Kippur. Shat Ne'ilah, which is connecting us to 1973. And it's really the first time mainstream Israel has come to terms with what 1973 did. On the first part of that series, at the end of the TV part, the drama part, they have on there a psychologist interviewing people. And they brought soldiers up they brought soldiers who fought in 1973 to the program, and they asked them, do you still have post-traumatic stress disorder? And he said to him, when did you think of the war the last time? And the man turned around to the person who was interviewing him and said, I dreamt about it last night. Every night, people who went through that war are still dreaming about it, of the friends they lost that were standing next to them, of people they had to pull out of burning tanks. This war is not a short war. It's not a 6-day war. This war will go on for months. And imagine, we have somebody who lives down the road to us who got married in the week of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He then got into his tank and went off to war. He didn't see his wife for the next 8 months. Very, very tough times. But thank God we held on to it. The place that you could see just beyond the UN border is also a place that Israel have been doing many, many important things over the last number of years. With the civil war that's been going in, we've been bringing in people for medical treatment from Syria and then returning them. But we have been taking them. People who come to the border, we've taken them in. And we've taken them to our best hospitals, made sure they're all dealt with properly before returning them back to Syria. The Golan, though, is not just about wars. And even though some of the wars took place in modern day time period, some of them took place earlier. What are we doing on the Golan? Why are we holding on to the Golan? What's our historical importance in the Golan? We're going to go drive across now to the southern part of the Golan to see one of the most famous sites. And by the way, if you're driving that way, you will see where the canal was built by the Syrians. And you drive all the way to the south towards the area of a place called Somet Gamla, the junction of Gamla. You enter into one of the most beautiful nature reserves in the country, especially when you can hike down or hike towards the waterfall. And of course, the famous falcons that usually are there. On this particular day, we didn't have time to film them. But this is the story of Gamla.
So we're standing here overlooking the Sea of Galilee that you can see the Kinneret behind us. The Galil would be on the other side of the Kinneret, of course, but we're in the Golan. You can't really come up to the Golan without visiting one of the most important sites that the Golan has for us today. In 1967, we found this site. We found at least, I would say, parts of the site, but in 1968 we came to do archaeological digs here, in this area over here. Gamla is mentioned to us already in the Talmud. We know about it. We also know this is a Jewish city from its beginning to, unfortunately, when it's destroyed. The only types of archaeological findings that we're finding in this area over here of Gamla are Jewish symbols. And therefore we know that this wasn't a Byzantine town. We know that the Muslims didn't live here. We know that the Cherkessim and other people didn't live in this area over here. It was only a Jewish area. And you have to ask yourself the question, who would be mad enough to live in a place like this? Because we're talking about the ridge that's behind us. The city itself went all the way down the hill that you see over here. It's called Gamla because of the camel's hump that you can see on the top over there. Only 5% of this actual city over here has been dug. And there's only one path, and that's actually the path that we're standing on now. This was the original path that also led to Gamla. It was the original path that, when we get to the story of the Romans, that they used too, in order to be able to come and destroy Gamla. So there's no path to Gamla from the other side. You can't get to it from this side over here, which is the Nachal, which is known as Nachal Gamla, and this riverbed over here, which is known as Nachal Daliot. There isn't a path. This is the only path itself. In and out of civilization was up this massive hill over here to get out towards other places in the Golan. Incredible that people came and settled here. But as we know from the Talmudic time period, they're here. We also know that Olei Bavel, people that came back from Babylon for the Second Temple period, came back to this place over here. But really the story of Gamla takes a massive turn when we start to talk about the idea of what happens here, not in 1968, but in 68 CE. That's 2,000 years before that. In 68 CE, we have the whole story of a man who's come up to the north. His name is Josephus Flavius, or somebody that we call in Hebrew Yosef ben Mattiyahu, who will come up to the north over here to fortify the Jewish cities to get ready for the rebellion. That rebellion starts in 67 and will end in 73 with the fall of Masada. Within that, of course, will be the famous year of 70, which is connected to the destruction of the temple. Josephus comes up here, helps to fortify the area, and we can see some of those fortifications now. If you look straight ahead of us now, you can see there's a round tower over here. This round tower that we see over here is connected to the fortifications. We can notice the walls that run around the city itself. And we can also see something else that's within the city. If you look at the only building that is open inside the city, that building is a building which is the Bet Knesset, the synagogue itself. The synagogue, which is one of the oldest synagogues in the world. Many people say it dates back to even the first temple period. But what was the synagogue doing here? We're going to talk about in another place, because we have over 40 synagogues that we found here in the Golan. One of them, and probably one of the most impressive ones, is the one of Gamla over here. The Romans know that the Jews have started to fortify many of those areas, and it's now down to Vespasian, before he becomes the emperor, to be able to take these places over here. They come up to these areas here, to the area of the famous places like Yotfat and like Gamla, the two most famous places where the battle will take place. And they stand here with all their fortifications. We know the Romans used the ridge in front of us over here, because we found a lot of archaeological evidence here. As they bombarded the Jewish city with ballista, with these massive stones, which of course were a bit like catapults, trying to break, if you want, the morale of the Jewish people. The Jews were living on houses that were in steps, one after the other, on top of the mountain as they climbed up to the top of the mountain. Very, very small, narrow paths that were here. And one time the Romans managed to break through. You can actually see where they broke through, because there's a path running straight into Gamla. That path shows us where the Romans went in. But when they went in, they climbed up on top of the people's roofs, one to the other. Their armor and the weight of their swords and everything they were carrying weighed them down too much, and they fell through the flimsy roofs of the Jews that were living below. The Jews then murdered the Romans. The Romans sat here not knowing what to do, until some Romans broke ranks one night and went back to that tower. As they got back to that tower, they pulled stones from the tower, and the tower collapsed with an almighty crash, woke up the whole city of Gamla, as the Jews now run towards the top. And the only person that we can learn the story from is a man called Joseph Matthew, or Josephus, who tells us now the story of Gamla. The Jews will run to the top of the mountain. The Romans have broke into the city. They're no longer going to go climbing on people's roofs, but they're running through the paths, slaughtering people on their way. They get to the top over there. The Jews are now at the top, shooting arrows down to the Roman army as they climb up. But for some reason, a freak wind comes, and the arrows, instead of going straight down, move off to the right hand side, and many of them now are getting injured from their own arrows. They see there is no other solution, according to Josephus, than to take the step from the top of the cliff and to jump into the river Red below. The Jews of Gamla will commit suicide right here. We ask the question over here, what were they fighting for? In 70 CE, we know they destroyed Jerusalem. But were they fighting just for Gamla? And then you get to one of the most impressive finds in any archaeological dig in Israel. That totally turns on its head the understanding of what people stood up for, then and still today. Because lo and behold, we found the coins from the revolt. And it says as follows: the first year of the rebellion for the sake of Yerushalayim. The first year of the rebellion to save the city of Jerusalem. In 67 CE, they knew that the battle wasn't about Yodfat. It wasn't about all sorts of places where they were having the battle at the time. It wouldn't be about Gamla. It was all going to be, at the end of the day, about Jerusalem. And the people of Israel would not be quiet for Jerusalem. They will stand up and they will fight for Yerushalayim HaKodesh, for the holy city of Jerusalem. And that is why the coins were minted with this idea, Leman Yerushalayim, for the sake of Jerusalem. The people of Gamla went to their death for the sake of Jerusalem. They knew they were the first line of defense for Jerusalem. And that will continue throughout our history. Just like if you go to Gush Etzion in 1948, when they fought a battle where 220 people will die finally on the last day of that battle. Why were they doing it? Leman Yerushalayim, to hold on to Jerusalem. David Ben-Gurion knew it in 48, just like the Jews of Gumla knew it 2,000 years before him, here on this mountain over here. This is the story of an incredible piece of land called Gumla. And again, what awaits us when we finally dig up the other 90-odd% of this city? Who knows? The other treasures that will be able to tell us another part of that story.
I have to first of all thank my wife for taking the video camera here, okay, in the video all the day. But you can hear the baby in the background crying his eyes out. He'd just been schlepped down to Gumla and back up, so no wonder he was crying. But the story of Gumla is an incredible story. I will say this: when people ask me what really happened in Gumla, do I believe that all the residents of Gumla jumped to their death? Well, that's a whole different story. But we did deal with it in another place, I think. Certainly on another program that I did for people in England, with a place called Yodfat, where he explains about suicide. Yerushalayim talks about suicide. And of course, the most famous place where he talks about suicide is Masada. We're not quite sure that everybody was committing suicide, but it could all go back to a story of Josephus himself. But it's for a story for a very different day. Gumla has incredible sights. Excuse me, the Golan has incredible sights to see. And one of those which has just been opened over the last couple of years. How many of you have been there, I don't know. There's a place called Omalcante. Omalcante, which means the mother of the arches. Kantir, the mother of the arches, because of the two arches they found there. The Arabs nicknamed the place. Remember, the way we know so many names in Israel is because the residents who stayed here and gave the name here. Jews number were expelled from many places, but we know those names because of those residents that kept the names. Omalcante today has got a new name by us called Ein Hakshatot in Hebrew, the spring that stands by the Kantir, the arches. But it connects us as well to what's about to take place in 2 weeks' time. Enjoy this beautiful, beautiful place of Ein Hakshatot.
Hi, so we've reached a place which is called Nator today, but at that time was known maybe as Ein Hakshatot. We're not exactly sure of the exact name of this area over here. The Arabs have a different name for this place over here. But we've come here to see one of the most incredible places that's in the Golan stand today, if not in all of Israel. As you look around now, the remnants that you can see down below over here, you would see these areas over here that were once houses that stood all around this area over here. In the 3rd century, they were built here. Now, in order for us to understand the history of this place over here, you need to really get to understand what was happening in Israel. Remember, the Second Temple is destroyed in 70 CE. There's going to be later on a rebellion known as the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, and the Jews are going to move up to the Galil, to the Galilee. That's where as well the Sanhedrin will move towards, and I'm sure that we're aware of the different movements of the Sanhedrin around the Galilee itself. Jews will move towards the Galilee, and finally, across there also, they will settle original towns that were once settled here in the Golan. There were towns here, and their settlement would get even bigger at the time. They would make their money from all sorts of ways, and Omalcante or Ein Hakshatot, where we are right now, will make a lot of money. They'll make it through possibly what's known as their linen industry that they had here, which we may talk about a little later on, and of course their olive oil industry that there was here. Olive oil will always make a person a lot of money. Still to this day, if you have a good crop of olive oil, you're going to make yourself a lot of money in this area over here. And one of the ways we see that is what they built here. You're going to come in now to see one of the most incredible buildings that's standing in the Golan. This is their Bet Knesset, and it had a 2nd floor to it, so it was much higher than what we see over here. But it's an incredible building that there is nothing like this, I have to say, standing in the country today that has been rebuilt with its exact stones. we find a lot of archaeological digs where we have to add stones from different layers, different levels, in order to bring it back to what it once was. Here, there was a pile of stones on the floor, just like you see from here over to my right-hand side. Notice that all the stones have a number on them. The archaeologist that was here, a man called Jerus, wanted to make sure that he kept archaeological truth. He numbered every single stone. They took all the stones away from a pile of stones that were here, that was found already in the 1880s by a man called Lawrence Oliphant, who was here in this area, who was a big archaeologist himself. Later on, another man in the 1930s will be here. His name is Sukenik. Sukenik will also be the man who will find the Dead Sea Scrolls. But nothing will happen until Yeshua Jerus decides to take it up himself and comes to a man called Rachamim Ze'evi. We called him in Israel as Gandhi, who unfortunately was assassinated 1 week later when he gave the budget to be able to build what we're about to see over here. They brought in a crane in this area, and they picked up all the stones and moved them out, and then they scanned each one. And with the scan, they were able to use a puzzle piece to be able to move each stone to be able to build what we see over here. Those that they couldn't find, which would have been the second floor, which they didn't have enough money to do, they left on the side. But they built the first floor to its entirety. The foundations were standing, and all they had to do was build up one stone after the other to bring back its glory. This was a very wealthy place. But in order to see its beauty, I want you to come inside. As you can see from the Bet Knesset, there are two sides to the Bet Knesset, and you'll notice over here, where I am now, the seats that would have been here, where people would have sat, they would have listened to the rabbi's drasha, his sermon, they would have sat, spoken to their friends. Remember, a Bet Knesset is connected to that idea of a bayit lichnos, to gather people together. And they would come and they would sit and they would speak. Only after the Second Temple's destruction will a Bet Knesset pretty much turn into a place of makom tefillah, of a place of prayer. Even though we have that before, it becomes much wider after the Second Temple. And we see that from what we have over here, which we don't have in so many other places. Because if you follow me round now, you will see one of the most incredible Aronei Kodesh arcs that you see over here, standing from the 600s to 7th century that you see here. Incredible. Look closely now. You'll notice there are many things here which are very familiar to us. You can see the menorah on the top, over here on the pillar. You see the lulav, you see the etrog, you see the machter, the shovel that was used to carry the incense. Remember what tefillah comes to replace. It comes to replace korbanot, the sacrifices that would take place in the temple. And after 500 years that the Jews have lived without a temple, they still have not forgotten it. And that's why, if you can pick all different types of artifacts that you would pick in order to put into your Bet Knesset, what do the Jews of Ein Kshatot pick? They pick the machter, the shovel for the incense, so that it reminds us of the temple itself. The kfanim, the grapes that you see here, and then you see the two eagles on the top over there, which I would say that the archaeologists are still thinking about what they were doing there and what they were symbolizing. Of course, we have the famous pasuk from the Tanakh, which talks about al kanfei nesharim, that God will save us on the wings of eagles. But maybe it was connected as well. Remember, we're under the Byzantine time, which came from the Roman Empire, and their symbol was connected to the eagle too. Whatever, we see the floor over here, which is very beautiful, that maybe had a mosaic on it as well, and we're not sure about that, but the actual stones were put back in the right place over here. Standing in the middle would have been the bimah, that would have been here. And from here they would have read the Torah, just like we read the Torah on Mondays, Thursdays, and on Shabbat. They would have done the same thing too, from this place over here. Second floor that there was at one time, with an arch roof, two sides, giving it a typical feel of what Batei Knesset in the Golan and in all of Israel at that time looked like. We have over 30 of them standing. We know of around about 40 that were here in the Golan pretty much at the time. But it's an incredible thing that we're standing in probably the most beautiful shul of its time. You know, when you come back to a place like this, You want to sing, you want to be able to pray in a place where you know that so many other people many centuries ago prayed here. This, unfortunately, though, took the turn of so many other places in Israel, especially on this side. In the 8th century, 739, there was a terrible earthquake. And I know you thought that he's going to talk about some type of marauding army that came and destroyed the Jews and killed the Jews. Well, no. This, unfortunately, was down to natural causes. The major earthquake that destroyed so much of Israel in the 8th century also took Ein HaKshatot and destroyed it too. And for 1,300, 1,200 years, the secret of Ein HaKshatot lied in a pile of rubble. Came along Yeshua Dre, rebuilt what we see today, that we can put the glory back into this Beit Knesset, into this shul. I'm so happy that you were able to come on a journey through the Golan with us, to be able to see some of the beauty that you might have known, and some of the beauty that we've introduced to you, and to give you once again that love for the land of Israel.
Okay. That was the Golan in an hour. And there is so much more to see and so much more to do in the Golan for everybody who really would like to travel and doesn't have to go to archaeology. You like the other stuff? The Golan's got it all. So I hope you enjoyed the tour. And I'm very happy, number one, to take any questions that anyone has. Akasha, please ask.
Firstly, Svi, that was amazing. Put your hands up if you want to go on a tour of any part of Israel with Svi in the next year or so. So yeah, there you go. We've just sold out a trip, Svi. We'll see. That's a conversation for another time. I'm going to actually see if anyone wants to ask anything. I think what I'm going to do is, I think I've just allowed you to unmute yourself. If anyone has a question, they want to unmute themselves, feel free.
I do. Please,
Cynthia.
Please.
Go for it, Cynthia.
It's something I heard about during the 73 war, that Kissinger stopped America supplying Israel with planes because he didn't want the Israelis to win the war so quickly. Was that correct? I can't hear you.
Oh, 1 second, Svi. Svi, you need to unmute yourself. I think it might.
Sorry.
There you go.
Yeah, okay.
It was my fault.
You're 100% correct. From what we know, that Kissinger did stop the possibility of Israel getting American arms to help it. It was left basically powerless. Remember, that goes back to 67 as well. I'm sure that you're very familiar with the famous story of the French ships that we bought, the Navy. Okay, and they refused to give it to us, and we won the 67 war. So what did Israel do? They took their Navy SEALs over and they hijacked the boats and brought them back to Israel. We paid for them. They're ours, they're not yours. We paid for them and brought them back with the chutzpah that we have. But thank God we were able to put as much political pressure on in America as well. We didn't have the F-15s in the war, but our air power was not supreme at the beginning. We were losing a lot of planes and pilots who were being killed. Many of them did manage to eject, and some of them were saved, but others of them, of course, we lost during that time. You should also be well aware that there was soldiers that were taken into Syria and were there for close to a year, as well as in Egypt. Once we'd worked out the tactics of the Syrian MiGs and how they flew, then the Israeli pilots actually managed to get the better on them. But it was a long battle for them, unfortunately.
Thank you for that great question. Thank you, Cynthia. Anyone got any other questions?
Yeah, I have one quickly. A fantastic presentation, Svi. Thank you so much. That film that you mentioned, or series, Sha'at Ne'ilah, is it available with subtitles?
So HBO have just bought it. Okay, so it's going to be, I think, probably translated into English, not just with subtitles. They just bought it. They bought it actually before it came out in Israel. They saw it and they loved it. And it tells a really very interesting look at what took place there. I mean, you watch it, and I'm from tanks in the Israeli army. I was from the 7th Brigade. I met Avigdor Kailani a number of times, the man who I have to say pretty much saved Israel. I was thankful enough to be the best soldier 3 times over and met him. But when you meet people like that and you understand what took place in the Golan, and I had somebody else on my tour who was on another mountain, just like the one where we were sitting underneath under the tank. He said to me, we were left helpless. It was Yom Kippur. Nobody was there. We were left helpless. And you see in this program, Shat Nila, how in the Helmond base, they managed to try and get out from one of the escape routes. But all the soldiers, apart from the 2 or 3, were murdered there by the Syrians. But 2 or 3 did manage to get out of those places over there. You know, I mentioned something when we were talking about the 73 war, about the reserves. Still to this day, we hold that close to 80, if not higher, % of all 18 to 21-year-olds, those that are battle fit and those that are on the border, will be murdered in the first 72 hours of the war. That's the price that Israel will pay. Because of and again, we're talking about major warfare. When we talk about the idea of Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, all coming towards us. Hopefully the UAE and Bahrain won't join in, okay, today, and Sudan and all those other places. But unfortunately, that's terrible thing to think about. The only way to save Israel is through the reserve duties. And I'll never forget my first time as a reservist in the Israeli army of being sent a message. So every Israeli soldier in the army receives a code. And that code is either over the radio, it's told, or on a TV in the middle of the adverts, okay? Or it's sent to you, somebody knocks on your door and just says to you the thing. You then know you have to go to your area where you gather together. And from there, you're going to be bussed up to your bases, wherever they may be. Israeli reservists, I'm not telling you any secrets now, okay? Israeli reservists, for instance, when I was a reservist in the tank units, we had a tank in a plastic bag that was oiled, filled with all the missiles that we need. All you had to do was cut through the plastic bag, sign on your equipment, and go. And that night, I'll never forget, it was like really weird for me, the first time this happened to me, to be called up with one of these. Somebody picked up the phone to me and said to me my code on the phone and put it down. Left, went, I think it was 2 a.m, okay? And you saw half of Israel moving, getting on buses, going across different places. I'll never forget being in Hadera, a sleepy town at the time, absolutely jam-packed with Israeli soldiers traveling all over the place, trying to make sure they get there in time to move up to the border if they need to go to the border. The only one time we ever took them out of the plastic bags and traveled from there was when the Second Lebanon War, actually. But apart from that, thank God they've been left in those things.
Wow.
But yeah,
thank you for that.
Yeah, Shat Nila is well worth watching when it comes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just also as a counterpoint to Cynthia's point about Kissinger, the reason, of course, that the Syrians were so well armed in 1973 was because of the Soviets.
Yeah.
They supplied them with everything.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, David.
Still today.
Anyone else want to ask anything else, or we'll call it a night there? I think we're going to call it a night there. So before we do manage to get on a tour of certain amazing, incredible parts of Israel with JROOTS and Svi Sperber at a later date, I want to thank you, Svi, for just to put it out there, for traveling up and spending an entire day filming in the Golan. I think you said it was your wife that was filming with you.
Yeah, that was the actual added advantage of the day in the Golan. Okay, if there would have been things that were open as well, we might have stayed there for dinner. But still, restaurants are not open and anything like that. So but we had a lovely day.
How close to where you were in Gamla is the winery that we all know about in Israel?
So the winery is only about 20 minutes, but it's not in Gamla. It's in Kutzerin. But it's 20 minutes away. But there are many, many, many more boutique wineries than just the winery that you're mentioning, which is the Gamla winery or the Golan winery.
I think the Galil wine, personally, I think the Israeli Galil wines are the nicest, but that's just a very personal opinion.
So you know the story behind the Galil wines. The Galil winery, the one that you're probably speaking about, is the same as the Golan winery. It's under the same branch. What happened was when Israel started to speak to Syria about the possibility of peace, the Golan winery got terrified We've built up ourselves a whole industry up here in the Golan. What are we going to do? So they then started to plant vineyards in the Galil, and they opened up the Galil winery in Kibbutz Yaron.
Galil, Golan, all those northern wines are absolutely delicious.
Yeah.
Most of the Israeli wines are delicious. I think Arthur's got a quick question before.
Yeah, just a quick question. How long does it take to drive to the Golan from Yerushalayim?
Today, it depends if you're familiar with the drive from Yerushalayim along the Jordan border, which is known as number 90 highway. Okay, the 90 highway. No, the 90 highway. Then it's going to take you into the southern part of the Golan. You'll be there within 2 hours, 2.5 hours. If you're going on the 6 highway, it takes today probably from Yerushalayim close to 3 hours. But I did it from Bet Shemesh in a day, easy. I think I left at 6:45 in the morning after Shacharit, and I got back I was back home 6:30.
So you could make it as a day trip, sort of, to see
You certainly can.
Yeah.
But I recommend spending more than that.
Yeah.
Those people who are here from the Tanya, easy. Okay, can do it.
And my grandson was in the yeshiva in Alon Habashan. So it used to take a good 4.5 hours actually, but we did it in a day. We went many times. It was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay, Flora.
Those were the days.
And I think the Gush Etzion wines are better than the Golan ones.
Okay, we can have a wine tasting evening. Okay.
I prefer the Scotch wines that we call whiskey, but if we're going.
I prefer the whiskey.
There you go, the whiskey.
And of course, Israel have now started developing whiskies from the Golan.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, it's much better than the first one. If you've got the first batch, terrible. Okay, the next batch is very good actually. Someone
bought me a bottle of the Golan with the maple syrup.
I'm very sorry for you.
Oh my god. Really? You know, if anyone wants to try it, you're more than welcome to come to my cupboard and try it. Anyway, I wanted to say thank you to Svi. I also want to say, just people should bear in mind, if you are planning a trip in the long distant future in 200 million years time when we can all travel to Israel, and you want tours and stuff, I'm not plugging JROOTS, but of course we can put you in touch with Svi and all the guys at JROOTS who do tours of any part of Israel, from the old city down the south up to the north. I always tell people, when you're going to Israel, whether you're going to take a JROOTS guide or anyone else, if you have an opportunity to go with someone that really knows what they're talking about, and we all like to think that we are expert tour guides of Israel, but when you go with somewhere as simple as Machane Yehuda, Shuk, or any of these places, to go with someone that really knows will change your whole perception, relationship, understanding of Israel, its history, the people. I guarantee you that. So that's just a plea. If you're ever planning a trip just to go on holiday, visit family, take a day, take 2 days, put some time in there. And there are endless opportunities to go with people, not just JROOTS, sorry, I've got to be fair to everyone. Absolutely. Endless opportunities to really go with someone like Svi, or if not Svi himself, that knows what they're talking about. So that's just a side push. Speaking of which, we have another one of these fantastic evenings planned for the week of Chanukah, and that is the Monday night of the week of Chanukah. I think that's the 14th of December, which of course is my mother's birthday, as I just realized now. But anyway, happy birthday.
Can I just say something to you?
Yes.
There's the Emunah virtual dinner on Monday, the 14th of December. I don't know if it's going to impact on me. I'm here in Israel. It will impact on me.
I apologize. I'm sorry. Most people at Belmont, we're going forward on the 14th of December. The beauty of all of these things is they can all be recorded. So I'm sure if you can.
Is this one recorded? Is this one recorded?
Yes, it's recorded. And I'm sure the Emunah dinner will also be recorded for anyone that wants to watch. And I think with a lot of these things, you can probably donate any time of the day. They will take your money without a shadow of the doubt. But that's what we're doing. And I think, Svi, the plan is we're going to be doing the story of Hanukkah in Israel, right?
We are.
So what an amazing opportunity to actually go through the story of Hanukkah in Israel from the comfort of our living rooms with someone that will be able to bring the story of Hanukkah live. So that's the 14th of December at 8:15, I believe. We're going to do that. All the information. If you found us tonight, you'll find us then. Keep tuning in, keep watching. Thank you, Tzvi. Loads of things coming up for in the next few weeks. Next Wednesday night, I am taking part in the 3rd Rabbi Steady Cook, where I will be challenged by a rabbi from Leeds, Manchester, and Newcastle for a regional Rabbi Steady Cook. The challenge will be making donuts and latkes. Watch this space. Over Hanukkah itself, we're having Tzvi Sperber doing a guide of Israel and the Hanukkah story. We're also planning a broadcast of a Havdalah, sing-along, song, kumzitz, Hanukkah lighting thing from the shul, which should be fantastic, amongst many other things going on. As always, check it out. Watch out for everything that's coming out. Belmont is alive, kicking, rocking, and anyone that wants a membership form, please do speak to me after. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Tzvi. It's late. We've kept you late enough. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was incredible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah, well done. Very nice.
Tzvi was good as well. Tzvi was also good.
Yeah, you were both very good.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
we will.
And his mother was the